So maybe last thing, I wanted you to give me your famous discourse on why our students should be studying history. I don't know if you want to kind of give me the rundown.
Well, I think to put it most simply, that studies in the humanities and history is right at the center of this, of course. Study in the humanities offers a far richer development of mind than I think most people realize.
Mm.
That, of course, there's a lot of transference of disciplinary knowledge. And there has to be, if you take a course in history in whatever subject, and if by the end of the course you don't know a lot about that subject, the teacher has really failed you. I mean, at the very least, we have to accomplish that primary aim.
Right.
Okay. But there's all kinds of other learning that takes place, all kinds of other intellectual formation and even ethical formation that takes place in and through the exercises that pertain to historical inquiry and the academic production characteristic of historical studies. And that kind of development, I think, falls into two categories. One of these is cognitive refinement. And what I'm talking about primarily here is the development of our intellectual faculties, our core intellectual faculties, the excellences of mind that characterize a thriving adult intellectual personality. And that goes beyond, and I think it's deeper than disciplinary knowledge. We're talking about articulation and rhetorical precision and sophistication, higher order reading comprehension, the skills of logical inference, the coherence of argumentative display, right? These are the kinds of attributes characteristic of all well-educated individuals. And we practice these excellences of mind, if you will, all the time in everything that we do as historians, as well as history students. And that kind of refinement is absolutely essential. And it's absolutely essential for university-educated individuals because they're not going to remember the details of the Napoleonic Wars.
Of course, yeah.
They're not. How much do I remember from the courses that I took as an undergraduate? I mean, I'm a historian, so there's more in there perhaps than it would be in the brain of someone else.
Sure.
But by and large, these ideas, they show up and they play their part in our intellectual development, and then they recede. This is characteristic of learning across the board. But what does remain, I would contend, is this kind of lasting improvement of the intellectual self at our basic cognitive levels, and that this is this should be a kind of education that undergraduates should want, because they're not going to remember everything they learn in the English or history or philosophy, but they will become a more adept writer. They will become more confident in public disputation. I mean, think about the classical excellence of disputatio. The idea that learning is not autarkic, but in fact is a social experience best undertaken in community with others, in which the exchange of views is right at the center, and that requires individuals to not only have the courage to share their views, but also have the humility necessary to recognize that they might be wrong.
Yeah.
And there might be someone in their midst who has a better expression of the truth of matters, to which they need to bend. That excellence of disputation, which we practice in historical instruction all the time, is a very desirable characteristic among any professionally trained individual in whatever field of endeavor, especially perhaps in our times with a growing emphasis on teamwork and even global interaction in business and in government work and in all walks of professional life. So individuals enrolled in our classes are going to practice the cognitive excellences characteristic of this kind of disputation. Mm. And of course, it's easy to address any one of these other areas, whether it's reading or writing or the organization of facts, the command of facts, the delivery of facts. History is a fact-based discipline.
Yeah.
And then the second category of excellence that I'm talking about here is ethical. There's nothing that we do, Isaac, you and I, alone as professors, alone as researchers. There's nothing that we do as educators. There's nothing our students will do under our supervision, whose success does not depend upon the practice of virtue or vice. And I say this with a great deal of conviction because I think it's absolutely true. When you think about the importance of honesty in managing primary sources. No. I mean, how many times, and I don't know what you're prepared to disclose, Isaac, but I'm going to put all my cards on the table here. Not infrequently when I was a graduate student, especially doing doctoral research in the archives, not infrequently I was challenged by a source that I didn't expect. And I pretended, I wanted to wish it away. I wanted to pretend like I never saw that.
Yeah.
Because it made me change my thesis and I didn't want to change it.
Right.
I didn't want that level of complexity because to try to integrate that new source was an intellectual challenge that was really difficult. And I'd rather pretend I didn't see that, but you can't pretend you don't see it. You have to be honest.
You have to respect the sources.
Yes. You have to have that kind of integrity.
Yeah.
As a professional or budding professional in this case, a sense of responsibility to the field, to the community of scholars, which is international in scope, to admit the existence of that source and to try to integrate it into the sweep of your argument. And the only way to confront that challenge successfully is to mobilize honesty and integrity, which are ethical excellences. And it'd be very easy to talk about just about any academic act in this kind of way. So as historians, we assign a lot of texts. Well, there's no way that anyone can learn anything from a text unless the reader is prepared to accord to the author a presumption of wisdom. Like maybe this person has something to say that I need to hear.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would you even pick up a text? And so that is a function of the master academic virtue of humility. Or when it comes to grading, you talked about grading before. We talked about grading before, about how important honesty is. But just as important from a teacher's perspective and students is a virtue like charity. So I tell my students, for example, as I understand charity as a professor, I think I should put the best possible spin on your writing rather than the worst. Mm-hmm. And then I'll ask them, would you like me to mobilize charity when I've never had a student who said no. So all of these ethical concerns, I think, are valid concurrently with the cognitive dimensions of historical instruction, as well as the raw delivery of historical information, transfers of knowledge, to suggest to students that in studying history, they have an opportunity for a fully orbed intellectual experience that will endow them with the lasting, I think, attributes of a well-ordered and ethically centered mind. And I don't know of anyone who wouldn't want that in our young professionals. So that the education in history, this is what I want to say to my students and all the people I talk to about this. The instruction that we're able to provide in the discipline, if it's done well, ought to produce the kind of young leader, the kind of young thinker who is capable not merely of mastering knowledge in a particular area of endeavor, but is capable of using that knowledge in a way that is aligned with the deepest excellences of the thinking self, and is capable at the same time of a kind of ethical insistence in their work that ought to lead to the kind of professional success and then the broader social and political and cultural success that we so desperately need.
Yeah.
In the world we live in. So if I get excited about education, if I'm passionate about education, and I am, this is the wellspring of it.
Yeah.
This is where it comes from, because all of a sudden, Isaac, what's at stake in education rises dramatically. The demands on good teaching rise dramatically. At the same time, the expectations that students ought to place on themselves rise dramatically. And as a result of the approach, I'll tell you, I've gotten far better buy-in from students. They say, okay, there's a lot at stake in this.
Hell yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
this is where I come from as a teacher. And this is the result of, 20 years now of work and reflection and mistake and refinement. And
Oh, it's so smart. It's so inspiring. God,
well, I wish that more people would think about these things, because
Sure.
they're not difficult to understand. The challenge is to integrate them in your teaching personality, and then share them with your students. Professors in particular are nervous about ethics, and I think there's a good justification to be nervous about teaching ethics, because I myself am not an ethical paragon. I'm not claiming that. Mm-hmm. What I am claiming is that I'm an incomplete individual in need of moral improvement.
Aren't we all?
And the practice of ethics
Yeah.
in my professional life is not going to hurt.
Absolutely.
Right. And
Yeah.
so the idea here is to engage with students together in this process of becoming better than we are,
Yeah.
in realizing the full nobility of an educated self. That's worth living for. That's worth working for. So,
Man, right on. That's really, really great. To hear the rest of this interview and other great conversations about history or drugs or both, check out the History on Drugs podcast wherever you get your podcasts.